If I start leaning like this while I'm talking, it's just because there's more of you over here. We sat unbalanced, and yet we sit where we normally do, us creatures of habit, right? Speaking of creatures of habit, do you ever find that somebody will give you an idea that you hadn't thought of in a certain way, and it shifts the way you're thinking, right? And I'm hoping today that I can hook you with perhaps a new way of looking at the Beatitudes at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount and the passage that you just saw, or that we just read, and we'll look at that passage again. It's kind of like when somebody first introduced to me the idea of a deficit versus strengths view in my teaching. This is the hook. I'm trying to get you thinking that it's okay to think about some things in a different way. When you're teaching, sometimes a student's rascally behavior can be unfun. For instance, I was a guest teacher, I was a substitute down in Eugene in a band classroom, and I was not doing things the way the normal teacher did them. And so, that, of course, the students would say, "That's not the way we," right? And there was this drummer who said it with like, oh, the face just got angry, the look that student gave me. And he spoke out in the middle of class. I'm trying to get things started. It's not the way we do it. What do you know? Now, deficit view says that kid's disrespectful, which he was. That kid is interrupting, which he was. That kid is not helpful. All true, all true, all true. But if I'm looking at that child from the deficit view, then I will interact with him as if that child is one who needs to be fixed and corrected, which he did. But the strengths view says that kid had some courage to speak out. That kid cared that the class would run in a way that the rest of the student body would want it to go. Am I making sense? If I see the behavior and label it as detrimental, which it was, my reaction is going to be different than if I label it, the kid's doing the best the kid knows how, and actually the kid's trying to do the right thing, he's just doing it the wrong way. When I switched my view to that kid's strong, that kid's intelligent, that kid's doing the best they can, all of a sudden here's this rebellious, disrespectful little pukehead in the back of the classroom yelling at me, the teacher, and I say, wow, thank you for your courage to speak out and let me know. I really appreciate the leadership that you're exerting for this class. How would you do this in this situation? Oh, your class would normally do that? Man, would you even mind coming down for it? Oh, you don't want to come down? That's cool. But hey, if I'm doing anything else in a way that's not helping the class do it the way that we're on the same team, I really appreciate you. Do you think I got a different response from the strengths view, yes or no? So in other words, there was a way of seeing something that gave me a different reaction in my life. And I want to look at this passage in a different way today. Now, as soon as we're done today, if you don't want to look at this passage the same way, feel free to ignore this idea and go back to the old way of seeing things. We're going to look at the whole Sermon on the Mount in accord with this last passage that we just read. And here's why. When we read it, and would you read it aloud with me this time? Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, stop right there. You see the setup, right? This is the last part, the very last thing of the Sermon on the Mount. These words of mine is the whole Sermon on the Mount, coming down to this point where he says, therefore, everybody, it is not the sentence before, it's not the sentence before that, it's not the phrase before that, it's not the parable. These words, let's continue. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them. Okay, so if I'm going to apply this passage, I need to be thinking of the whole set. Yes? The whole set, and act upon them. That person can be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock, and stuff happened, and people accused him, and they came at them, and life was terrible, and they lost their leg, and the storms, and the rains, and the winds, and they stood solid. They didn't fall, because it was founded on the rock, because of what they did from what Jesus said. But everyone who hears these words of mine, are you still reading it out loud with me? Your lips aren't moving. You're amazing at that. I didn't hear you either, but anyway, here we go. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. All these ideas trickling down to this passage, and all of a sudden, if you've heard all this, but you're not doing it, then when you lose your leg, or you get the cancer, or your children disobey you, or you, everything's like shifting sand, and your house falls, and the tumble is great. The tumble is great. And of course, we all want a solid life, right? We all want peace. We all want joy. We all want to contribute. I want to suggest that it's not just that I want to be comfortable, but I really want to make the world around me a bit better place too. And there's only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ and the words that he gave and our obedience to him. So today we are going to look at this idea of, from the title, the rock hunting. We're going to hunt for the rock, that solid ground to stand on, and find a clear process for the solid life. Here's the new idea. The new idea wasn't that all of that leads to that passage. I think most of you had that before. Here's the new idea. I think the Beatitudes are an outline for the Sermon on the Mount. I think they're every time I've heard the Beatitudes before, it was, hey, if you're poor in spirit, it's okay. You're going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. It was as if you're in this state, don't be downtrodden. And I think that's true. I think that's a correct way of applying it. But I started noticing something. And here, if you have your paper thing, sometimes when other preachers are preaching and they don't have these, I create my own. This might sound weird. Occasionally, I even draw the blank in so I can fill the blank in from what they're saying. I know. That's my head. There you go. But if you have these, you feel free to join me out. This is the outline for the day, and I think it's the outline of the Beatitudes, and then I think Christ illustrates this outline through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. The first is the point of persuasion. The idea that there's something to aim at. The point of persuasion. The second point, and you can see the 1 and the 2, so I skipped some of the blanks and I went down to number 2, the path to walk. I think Jesus then describes, okay, so if you're persuaded that there's something missing and something to aim at, and you're committed to aiming at it, well, this is how you walk that way. This is the path to walk. And if you walk in this manner, there's a productive outcome. There's a result. There's a change that happens in your life and the lives around you. A change that happens in your lives and the lives around you. So we're going to look at the outline of the Beatitudes, apply it to the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, and then we're going to look at how this last part of the Sermon on the Mount is a tool that Christ gave us so that we know, are you doing it right? Are you walking my life correctly? And maybe you're walking my life correctly over here, solid ground here. Kids disobeying you, it's okay. You still got faith. You know how to deal with this. You're being calm. You know how to love through that situation. Your boss is defaming you and putting you down at work. You don't know how to deal with that. You come home and your whole ground is shifting, right? You're, no, because somebody wrongly accused you. I think the Sermon on the Mount gives us what to do about that and how to behave in that situation in a way where we're on solid ground. Conflict in a marriage. I think the Sermon on the Mount gives us a clue on how to walk through conflict in a marriage, which is just going to happen, on solid ground. Yes? All right, off we go. The first thing, the point of persuasion. The point of persuasion. Cookies aren't bad, right? Although mint strawberry water is probably a little healthier for us, a cookie here and there. These are just my symbols of the idea that we like to live one way. There's a way that seems right to us, seems comfortable, and yet we all need to be persuaded in something new. And I think the point of persuasion, I tend to eat fewer cookies when I am just off of my YouTube about health, right? After I have just watched a YouTube about the horrors of sugar, I don't go grab a cookie. Now, if I've gone 4 or 5 days without one of those YouTubes about the horrors of sugar, like Thursday, I might cram 3 or 4 of those things in my mouth. I know it's gross. Forgive me. Don't look down on me too much. My diet is not one of those areas you want to follow me in necessarily. But the point of persuasion shows me what I'm missing and where I should be aiming. Does that make sense in our lives, right? And the Sermon on the Mount starts right off with this idea of the point of persuasion. He says, blessed are the poor. After he does the Beatitudes, what's the first thing he goes to? You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost something, you were created in the image of God. But if you have lost that image, am I making some sense? I think he's lining up this idea that when you've lost something, if you know you've lost it, you know where you're at. You know where to start. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those of you who know that you've lost the flavor and the persuasiveness of your life. You are the salt. But if, blessed are those who mourn, knowing it. As soon as Adam and Eve knew they lost their saltiness, they hid. They covered up and hid. Yes? What's the next thing Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount? You are the light of the world. You were supposed to be on the top of the hill shining. Your deeds were supposed to be done in such a way that it brought glory to God. But if a lamp is put under a basket, if you know you've lost something and you were trying to hide the fact that you've lost something, right? Can you just picture us curled up in our blanket? I don't know. My brain is wondering, I might have this wrong, so try this out. I might be totally misinterpreting this, but there's something in it that makes me go, the person who is the light of the world that's covering up their light, why are they covering it up? Because they don't think they're worthy of the light that's already in them? Because they're afraid of it, sad about it, mourning that they're not doing enough? The meek, deciding to submit, to obey. The very next thing in the Sermon on the Mount, you're the salt of the earth, but if you've lost your saltiness, if you already know you're poor, you're the light of the world, but if you're hiding it under a bushel, sad and drawing away, well, here's the next thing. Don't misunderstand why I've come. I'm not coming to abolish the law, I'm coming to fulfill it. But when you know the law, if you ignore it rather than doing it, down in verse 19 of chapter 5 of the sermon, but anyone who obeys. You know what that word meek means? Blessed are the meek. Meek is that term that the horse farrier would, not the farrier, farrier is shoes, horse trainer would use for the horse that was already trained. Here's a powerful horse kicking down fences, running off. You can't put the bridle on. You can't put a saddle on. It's absolutely useless. That horse is useless except for its beauty and sign of power. But when that horse is willing to submit to the saddle and submit to all of that power aimed at the right thing, that's meekness. What's humbleness? Humbleness is that piano player that plays beautifully, but when a little kid is just learning the first two notes, comes up, wow, nice job, that's amazing. That's humbleness, right? The cook who rejoices over their child's first meal that's burnt and tastes horrible. That's humbleness, right? Meekness, power constrained towards. And where does he say the meekness is? You're the salt. If you've lost the salt, you know you're poor, right? You're the light. Don't hide it under a bushel. Don't be sad about who you are. Set it up on a hill and submit, obey. Meekness going on. Isn't it interesting that before we can make a difference in our own lives, we have to make the decision? Yes? That point of persuasion, that there is a better way, that you're missing something and there's something even better. God's way is even better. So what is God's way? And I want to suggest the path to walk in, the next three things in the Sermon on the Mount. And our brains like to find patterns. And so, yes, I am constructing a pattern out of this that might not have been intended in the scriptures. Does that sound fair to say? And yet, if we can find the pattern and it's helping us live a more Christ-like life, let's go for it, right? Hunger and thirst. That's the next one in the Sermon on the Mount. So you've submitted, you've said the meekness, and now hunger and thirst for righteousness. What's the next thing he does in the illustrations of the Sermon on the Mount? You have heard that it was said, don't murder, but I tell you, don't hate. You have heard, but I tell you, hunger and thirsting not for the rule, not for the guideline, not for the do this, but for the idea underneath, for the meaning underneath. Hunger and thirst for the right thing, for the deep thing underneath. And he goes, oh goodness sakes, here I have 3 pages of this sermon. You've heard, don't commit adultery. But I say, if you're even looking, am I making sense? Hunger and thirst for the righteousness. And then this, the mercy, emulating God, is sprinkled throughout the Sermon on the Mount, sprinkled throughout it, right? We get to the point you heard the law says, punish an eye for an eye. But I tell you, blessed are the merciful. Why? Because they'll get the mercy of God. The Lord's Prayer. When you forgive, God forgives you. Yes? When you are offering a sacrifice, when you're coming to your Father, if you know somebody has something against you, your hunger and thirst for righteousness, you were supposed to go show mercy to that person and reconcile with them. Interesting, isn't it? So the Sermon on the Mount could be illustrating this process, this path of states and attitudes, these blessed attitudes that we walk in our Christian life, so that when we get to the end of our life, and even today in the middle of it, we're on solid ground. We're on solid ground. We know we're not blown about by winds. This part, I was feeling like, oh, nope, it doesn't work. This idea that it's an outline doesn't work. This doesn't work at all anymore. As soon as I got to the pure in heart, for they will see God. Pure in heart, for they will see God. Because then you get to the Sermon on the Mount, and you're at the part where it says, watch out, don't do your deeds publicly. Do them privately, where your Father can see you. Oh, wait a minute. Who am I trying to see? So the pure in heart could be that I am giving deeds to be seen by my Father. Maybe. I don't know. I might still be constructing something. I might still be reading a little bit too much into this idea. When you pray, don't pray like the hypocrites. Instead, go into the secret place where your Father sees you. Blessed are the pure in heart, the people who are focused on what? He says it outright. Seek the kingdom first. What does pure in heart mean? It means not maniacal, monocular. I'm thinking, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the single lens of a glass, the monocular. Is there a word that means singular focus? No? Like a focus on one thing? Monofocal-matic. Can I make a word up? Is that okay? Huh? What? Monofocal-matic. We'll say that. Focused on one thing. Don't store up treasures on earth. Why not? Because you're focused on what? Is your heart pure? Are you seeking the kingdom of God? Hunger and thirst for righteousness. The idea underneath the rules and the laws. Why do we drive 55 or 60? Because it's a safety issue. If I'm on the road with the intent of being safe, I will respond to the law differently, right? Don't store up your treasures. Verse 22 in chapter 7. Your eye is a lamp of a body that provides a light. When your eye is healthy, when your eye is focused on the right thing, your whole body is filled up. Your whole body is filled up with the light. Don't worry about your everyday life. Instead, focus on the one thing. Look at the birds in the heavens. They're not worried about it. They're focused on the one thing. Then you get to don't judge. Now, isn't this fun? Because all of a sudden, the path to walk is all one thing, right? Me not judging somebody else could be my hunger to do it the right way. Me not judging somebody else could be mercy, emulating God's desire to forgive and release and not count everything against everybody, right? It also could be the pure focus, because he goes right into don't judge somebody else. Instead, take out the plank from your own eye. Focus on God instead. So if I'm so singularly focused, monofocal-matic, on... Did you write that down? Monofocal-matic. Singularly focused on God, I don't have time to judge the people around me. I don't even have time to judge them because I'm so focused on the one thing. How could I not see God in the middle of that? And it's a promise. The pure in heart will see God. Pure in the heart will see God. Then we get to the last three. The peacemakers, persecuted, mocked, and lied about, and then the reward in heaven, the productive outcome. When we get to the Sermon on the Mount at the end, it says there's a narrow gate. It's a tough road. We're going to look at that in a couple weeks when we get to talk about Deuteronomy 30. And we're going to look at how do we apply this idea of, okay, if Jesus gave us a way to evaluate if I'm getting the message right, if I'm living the life right, if he gave me that, what do I do about it when I find out I'm on shifting sands? What do I do about it in my life when there's an area that all of a sudden I don't feel all that solid? We're going to talk about that in 3-4 weeks. Not how to fix it, but how to do it God's way in the middle of that. Right here as we get to the end, when it says the narrow gate, it's a tough way, but if you've done all these things, he goes to 3 things. Peacemakers, new identity. If we're living that way, he says you will become a new person. You will be called sons of God. Life around you is going to have peace. Persecution is a result of doing it the right way. If you are doing it the right way. But the result from the persecution, if you are on the solid rock, is joy. If you go back to the Beatitudes, blessed are you when people persecute you. You're going to count it all joy. Does that sound like something James, a brother of Christ, said? Right? Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. And the Beatitude says the same thing. The persecution isn't going to be a bad thing. It's actually a positive result of living the right life. And the reward's the long-term reward of gaining heaven, stepping into heaven, being one with God there. So after the narrow gate, all of the teachings and the Beatitudes, and then we get down to this point where he says, this isn't easy, this is difficult, there's a narrow gate, few people walk it. Well, who does walk it? And then he gives this picture of, let me tell you the people to listen to. Be aware of false prophets and the disguised ones. Let me tell you who to listen to. I want you to be aware. You're going to see some people whose lives are shifting. Don't go to somebody who doesn't know how to use money or make money or invest money or contribute money to learn about money. Don't go there, right? Don't go to somebody who's on their 4th marriage to learn about how to find the right person. Don't do it. Don't go to the person who has 6 rebellious kids to find out how to parent. Don't listen to their advice. He says, look at the fruit. Who are you going to listen to? When somebody is teaching you, trying to exemplify the life, look at their fruit. There are areas in my life, I got to say, don't listen to me. I think there's some fruit on my tree that might not be, I don't know, I'm suspicious. Anybody else out there want to admit that there might be some areas that you might not be the person to give advice? Okay, that's dangerous to say up front, but at the same point, weigh it out. What I'm saying even now, right, in these ideas, those of you get to observe me in and out, if you're not seeing the fruit, maybe don't listen to the idea. Who to listen to? Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, is going to make it into the kingdom of heaven. Watch for the fruit for who to listen to. And then he goes to the building on the foundation. Anyone who listens to my word and acts on them has solid ground. So how do we know if we're doing it right? My friend John does construction and stuff, maintenance and things. You guys know John Bennett. He's here for years and such, and he told a story. I believe it was about his dad had a door that wasn't closing. It had like a gap on one side and wasn't closing on the other. And so John went over to help him with it, looked at it, and his dad was, let's take the door off and shave the door down so we can close it, and then we'll just put one of those foam things on. That would be my solution. That sounds simple, easy, nice and straightforward. John looks at it, and he looks at where it's scraping on the floor, and he realizes, oh, the floor's got a curve, right? For a lot of us, when something in our life isn't settling, we take the aspirin, right? We put the ice on. We take the prescription the doctor gives. We don't dig very deep. John saw the floor, pulled the carpet back, saw the swelling of the underflooring, said, we'll have to replace that, pulled that off, saw mold on the beams that were holding it that went all the way to the wall over where, it was a leak from the bathroom that was coming over, and sheetrock is off, new floor joist in, he went all the way down to the foundation. When we're on shaky ground, when our life is feeling like it's not working, we got to dig deep, folks. We have to go deep. Because you are the salt of the earth. But if you've lost the saltiness, there's a way. There's a way for that saltiness to come back through the redemptive power of Jesus Christ. You are the light of the world. But if you're hiding it, just know that you're poor. Be sad about it and have the meekness to say, God, I'm going to start to do it your way. Hunger, thirst for the righteousness. He shows you what that looks like right there in the Sermon on the Mount. Read the chapter out. Hunger and thirst for it. What does mercy look like? If you are being shaken, it is probably because, not the circumstance. Do we have evidence throughout Christian history that people who were persecuted, put down, damaged, impoverished, were on solid ground, rejoicing and facing it? Yeah, we do. We do. Digging down deep isn't necessarily comfortable. And the last thing it says in there, it goes back to the actions, right? You hear the words and you do the actions. And I want to suggest the actions part more than the feelings. The actions part is going to be what's going to put us on that firm foundation. It's hear the word, do. So in 3 weeks, I'm going to give us some tips on how to do those things that we know are the conscious, the Spirit's been witnessing. You got to get over this. You have to move past this. You need to start. You need to stop. You need to start. You need to, come on. Hunger and thirst for my righteousness. Start being merciful. Stop judging. I want to call you my child, my peacemaker on this earth. So in 2-3 weeks, we're going to look at what God provides to help us to act on what He's taught us to do. A clear process for a solid life. Well, maybe not that clear. Somewhat clear. I think clearer the closer we look at it, the more we reflect and the deeper we dig. And then we'll look at now or forever in a couple weeks, looking through Deuteronomy. Just an idea, may be helpful. Maybe you can set the idea aside. That's it. Shall we pray? Let's do that. Would you stand with me as we pray? God, I know sometimes little ideas can make a big difference. A little shift in what we're looking at can make a big difference. And I strongly believe for each area in my life where I don't feel solid or like the ground shifts underneath me, you have an answer, a solution, and a way to live, and the power to do it. You've already provided it. So I pray our mind could think over this in the next couple weeks, that you've provided a way, hungering and thirsting, showing mercy. You've provided a way, and that we would do that work of digging down, finding the rock, finding the correct idea, the truth, the action that we need to claim and live in. And the purpose of that, God, is so that we can shine your love to others, so that we really can be your children, your peacemakers in this world, carrying on the gospel message, living out that gospel message, that others would know your love from our lives. Amen. There is no fellowship dinner, but there is a benediction song. We'll call that our feast.
This song might be new to some of you. but I think there's a lot of really beautiful imagery in it. So just listen closely to the words, and I know you'll catch on.
Blessing our hands and covering our heads. God, our Mother, leading us into peace, drawing and comforting all those in need. Brother, guiding our very step, deliver us and grant places of rest. Jesus, Savior, grabbing us from the grave, cheating the fallen, bringing the light of day. Hallowed be thy name. Hallowed be thy name. Hallowed be thy name in all the earth. One more time. Hallowed be thy name. Hallowed be thy name. Hallowed be thy name in all the Amen. We have one final hymn. I think it really fits in with the sermon. My hope is built on nothing less. Talking about that solid ground that we need. We'll get it. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all love unchained.